Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind, The Reunion, Season 8. Let's watch.
Taylor and Garrett. We're loving the new look. Is it safe to say we can call this Taylor's version?
No. This is Garrett's glow-up era. The hair with the 5...
What? What? No. What? This is the number 4 most memorable moment. It's not even a memorable... He came in with a fancy jacket? Who gives a shit? Of all the things you could be talking about. Now, you know, this is a marketing thing, so they're not trying to actually scientifically come up with the 5 most memorable moments. Or maybe I'm just completely out of touch, which wouldn't surprise me. But he comes in with a fancy... They all come in with fancy coats. Compared to all the other things, drunk Jessica hitting on Barnett in front of Mark and Amber. You're telling me him walking in with a fancy... It's not even... I don't really... I did notice her dress, because her dress looks like a Wonder Woman, like, metal thing, which is fine. But if you would have asked me what Garrett wore ever, I would be... I don't know. So it's not... I don't think it's very memorable to anyone, right? I don't know. Micah and Irina laughing at Amber as she cried about being dumped by Paul. For Micah. You're telling me his jacket is more memorable than that? Andrew applying eye drops. You're telling me that is more memorable than that? Come on.
Woo! The glow up.
So, Dave, what's wrong with you? What was it like watching all this back for you?
Oh, man, it's been a lot.
How does your sister feel now watching you guys?
Well, they edited that. I wonder what he said after that. I was hoping he would say it was embarrassing for him. I mean, I don't need him to be embarrassed, but that is one of the better reactions that I would want to hear from people, of just like, oh, watching me, you know, struggle. You know, at the time I was really struggling, but it's embarrassing because why was I so fixated on that? You know, you would hope that he would say something like that. You know, so they asked him and he's like, oh, it was a lot. And then there's a quick edit to her question. So I'm guessing that his answer wasn't very interesting, which would have been interesting to hear, I think.
And watching your love and watching you fall in love now that she's been able to see the show.
Her biggest concern of me going on this in general was she didn't want me to be shown in a bad light, which here we are. So she struggles watching it, like seeing how hurt Lauren was and how hard it was for her to go through that.
Okay, that's interesting. At least from Dave's account, he's saying that his sister felt bad for Lauren, which doesn't fit with the way Dave was painting her, or at least the cartoon version of his sister being like, she's not good enough for you. It doesn't sound like it was that, right? Now, I will say that I don't know about Dave, but the hypothesis of dependent personality is such that, you know, the overfunctioner and the underfunctioner will operate in such a way that will unconsciously keep this configuration overfunctioning and underfunctioning. And there's a lot of different methods to do this. And the whole scenario could be, which I can't know, an example of that. That, you know, I know you're going to screw things up and you're going to be seen in a bad light. So don't do it. And then he does it, and he's trying to break free. He's trying to be independent. And then he does make a fool out of himself. He does become the villain. And then it's like, oh, you know, I told you that would happen. I don't know. You know, the sister could be the nicest person on the planet. And as a part of this, the sister is like, and look what you're doing. You know, like it all can fit.
Lauren, how was it for you watching back your relationship?
It was tough. It was a tough watch for sure.
So they showed very little of Dave responding, which I don't know what that means. It could mean that he rambled, which I can see because he can do that. Talking, you know, me talking as someone who rambles a lot. But there's another possibility that he said something more interesting and they cut it out. I don't know. I'm going to hope that they only showed one or two sentences of what I'm guessing were a number of sentences because they were just trying to be concise because he didn't say much else beyond that. Because I'm really curious. Maybe they'll get back to him. Hopefully they will.
Within like days of us ending, but watching it back, I gained a little bit more and just kind of saw the way we had conversations and problem solved or lack thereof. And I really started to see like emotional maturity wise, I was like, I am light years ahead of you. And that became very clear as I was watching it back.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think he's agreeing. I think that's him saying, I think that's fair to say. And yeah, it sounds like everyone's in agreement, including him. And that's not an insult to him. I think there's a, some path to that. I don't know what that is. We could speculate, the underfunctioning or the overprotectiveness or the insular community. I don't know if the Catholic community, the particular religious community. I don't know.
I think that's fair to say. Yeah. No, I'm not going to try to act like, I was above that. Lauren is an amazing person, and we had a lot of good times together, honestly. There's just one thing we couldn't get over.
Yeah, that's big of you to say.
I couldn't get over.
I had the same reaction. So this is actually in line with a lot of my observations of them, that Dave is aggravating and odd and concerning, problematic even, and yet he's operating honestly and authentically. This isn't a put on. It's not a manipulation. He just is this way. And he even has moments where he looks at himself and says, yeah, there's something weird going on. And so as he's saying, it's like, there's something we couldn't get over. And as soon as I heard we, I'm like, we, and then she goes, we, I'm like, think, and he's like, I, so, this is all consistent with that. It doesn't mean that he's not a jerk face or that, maybe that's the theme for this reunion, is that people can hurt people not because they're inherently an asshole or that they're a psychopath or that they lack empathy. People, in fact, all of us, you included, have hurt people in relationships, sometimes in severe ways that you might not even be able to admit to yourself, ways that I might not be able to admit to myself. And that doesn't mean that we lack empathy. I think that needs to be very clear, not only just for accuracy, but because if we write narratives that every sign of someone hurting someone indicates psychopathy, narcissism is what will be said on the internet, on TikTok, love bombing and all that stuff, then what kind of world are we living in? And why would you want to live in that world?
When was the last time you guys saw each other or spoke to each other?
We've talked a lot in the last couple weeks, honestly. Last week, 2 weeks, maybe.
We hadn't talked really in the last year. Mm-hmm. We would like see each other at bars, not talk to each other. So
initially, and I'm kind of hoping that this is true, is that there isn't any remaining animosity or conflict to mull over. And maybe that's because once they broke up, they just broke up. Unlike the other couples.
I will give you credit. You sent me like a really kind and mature text a couple weeks ago about that other guy and some clarity that you gained. And I appreciated that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's interesting. So she's commending him. And I wonder what that clarity is. I'm guessing it was the jabroni was a jabroni.
Guy that you had hooked up with shortly before coming on the show.
Yeah.
Which was a big deal in
Big deal.
evolution of your relationship. What was the text, if you don't mind me asking? What was the text? The clarity.
The clarity, I mean, I've learned a lot about him in the past, 2 weeks. He's just been trying to latch onto this situation. And, obviously we were warned about people like that.
Okay, so warned by whom? Maybe by production or just other cast members, I don't know. But so he's saying that he's seen signs. It sounds like there are signs, which I'm always suspicious of, because people can see signs when they're more debatable. But Dave is saying that the guy in question, her friends with benefits prior to the pods, has indications that are in line with what Lauren's friends say, which is that he's just trying to stir up the pot because he wants clout or he likes drama or something. So Dave is saying that he is seeing evidence of that. So a few weeks ago, I'm guessing, so I'm always trying to figure out when the reunion is filmed. And this seems to indicate that it was filmed, fairly shortly before they aired it, because if it was a few weeks and there's already posts, then I'm going to take a guess and say that at least the first week had already been posted. And had we seen in that first batch of episodes them at the getaway and them already fighting about that guy? I don't know. But it sounds like maybe something like that.
Into this and going through that process, and it really brings out the worst in people. And at the time, it's just it's very hard to go back and watch that because, and honestly, and Sarah, I give you a lot of credit, like the way you defended Ben, and really you were convinced you were like defending the person you loved, and you see it with Danny and Taylor too. Like they just do such a great job of having each other's backs. So
defending Ben. What's happening? So I'm guessing that Lauren on Instagram was defending Ben. So I'm guessing that the episode with Ben saying, I don't know, in the pods about politics and values, that people were attacking Ben, which of course, right, which is not okay. We don't bully people, particularly for shit like that. You can certainly have a problem with it. You can talk about it. You can talk about it with your friends. You can have your thoughts. You can have a problem with racism in general. You can have a problem with privilege in general, but to attack Ben. And then for Lauren, it sounds like she defended Ben, said, no, he's a good like there's some issues there, but don't go that far.
People. And at the time, it's just it's very hard to go back and watch that because, and honestly, and Sarah, I give you a lot of credit, like the way you defended Ben.
Sarah. I thought he sort of jumbled up. Maybe this is why they edited him out earlier, because he's just kind of, but he's like, Sarah, you defended Ben online. So, okay, it would make more sense that Sarah, and did she? That's interesting. And when I'm done with the reunion, I think I might actually review some more of these kind of posts. I don't know. Ooh, that reminds me, I need to give out a end of season survey to y'all. So watch out for that on my page. I assume that if I just post something like, hey, take the survey, because I posted it on YouTube, it doesn't show up as a video, it shows up as a post, and I assume it'll show up in your For You page. But if you don't see those things, you want to go to the community tab. But by the time you see this video, I will have already administered the survey, I think. Anyway.
And really, you were convinced you were like defending the person you loved, and you see it with Danny and Taylor too. Like they just do such a great job of having each other's backs. So going through all that, I learned a lot from a lot of these other couples and how they handled those things. And I definitely could have supported Lauren a lot more in that situation.
Okay, I was wondering where he's going with that. So he's saying that he's learning, and there's a possibility that this is more in line with that he's just completely naive and inexperienced, and he's never seen this before. He doesn't know. He's like a child. Is that the theme of this season? Man-child. And he is saying that he should have defended Lauren because that's what people do in relationships. I've learned. I'm new to this planet. And, people, that'll happen. And that's part of the story, dude. The other part is you don't just defend out of just obligation. You figure this shit out. I mean, if she was lying, then, okay, look into it. But he didn't. And I've already been over all this.
It's very obvious. Like, I fell in love with you. We went to Honduras. I felt like we left there with such a strong connection. Like, I remember thinking, I know Dave better than any guy I've ever been with. And here we are now, like, ready to tackle this next phase of things. And I was so honest with you the whole time. And you chose to believe everyone but me, everyone but your fiance.
Yeah, she's being real clear about it. I don't know. This feels so much more comfortable than the other couples talking about things, because they're essentially just reiterating what we saw. The other couples that we've seen so far, the way Sarah was talking about Ben, the way Virginia was talking about Devin, the way Monica and Madison were talking about Joey, although might have a all validity, it might be all valid. It's just like all of a sudden there's like, wait, what? It's just so much new stuff. And then you hear the data that they're gathering and and it all happened off camera and you're just like, wait. So to hear Ben and Lauren basically just review what we saw and reiterate things, it's like, okay, all is normal in the world. I don't know.
I agree with you. It was hard for me to watch back knowing what I know now. My mindset's completely shifted in the last, 2-3 weeks whenever the truth about this guy came to light. Even my friends that had told me, they'd all believed this entire past year the same thing I did.
You might ask, well, why didn't you look into it? Or why did you believe it? I mean, all the data was there. You knew that your friends, who I guess you trust, were being told something by this third guy, and you just went with it. Why? All you have now is just some little signs that the guy might be up to no good. And now all of a sudden you're like, oh, well, why did you need that? Why couldn't you have at least wondered that? And he did. He's like, I don't know who to believe. But, and at the end of the day, I'm not a fan of that phrase, but I'll use it. At the end of the day, he would still accuse Lauren. He wasn't going to that jabroni and saying, are you up to no good? He was going after Lauren. You were the one that lacked integrity, right? So you might ask yourself that question. But one, incompetence schema and underfunctioning, and the opposite side of codependency, which is dependency, he's still in that. And this is more evidence that he is an underfunctioner, that he is dependent, that he doesn't know what he's doing. And also I talked about how, which reaffirms himself. That's where he's comfortable. The other angle to this is that with all personality disorders, maybe aside from antisocial and psychopathy, which I'll get to in another deep dive at some point in the future, but all the personalities besides that, they all have a theme of disconnection with the self. It's typically attributed to borderline, but it's really across the board that they were denied the opportunity to get to know themselves because they were not paid attention to or attuned to in a consistent way. And the child doesn't know how they feel. They don't know what they want. They're walking around the world acting like they have wants and needs and stuff, but they have very little, how do we know when we need a hug? How do we know when we are in love? How do we know how to take an action, right? I'm hearing this influence. My sister wants this thing. My friends are hearing there's this jabroni, there's production, there's Lauren, there's me. And how do we make those decisions? It's a very strange process, and you can't put words to it. We have theory about it, but they're hard to test. And we've been testing these motivational, emotional processing theories for decades, and there's still a fair amount of debate. It might be all of them at different times, but we have a really hard time knowing what is it about us that makes us so certain. Because when we fall in love and we get engaged and we get married to someone, for the most part, we are certain, or at the very least certain enough. How do you know? When you ask people, they got a list, but we know that that's just attributing a list to a scenario that is unspoken, that is impossible to put to words. And so when you are disconnected, you've never been allowed to connect with your needs and your wants, and you don't even know that you are disconnected, or you suspect it, but you run away from it because you don't know what to do, then you either just randomly act based on what you think other people want or based on what you think you're supposed to do, or you do nothing because you're just waiting for someone to tell you what to do. And it kind of looks like that.
And it was just all fabricated.
Did you truly believe them over her, or do you think you had already kind of one foot out the door and you were looking for an out?
I was not, honestly. I love Lauren. I always have since, we met. So it's been really hard, honestly, to like.
Yeah, I'm happy that he can be vulnerable. I think it will win the crowd over. At least I hope so. Not that people need to like him, but they need to back the fuck off. So I think this will help, and it looks genuine. And so often I would hope that everyone would be allowing themselves to do this if they felt like they wanted, if they felt safe to do so. Like if Ben had some moment of tearing up, I think it would help. It would help Sarah. Anyway, so yeah. So when he says, you know, I loved her, I've always been in love with her, it doesn't feel real to me. But it's not that he's lying. He could be, but I think he thinks he knows, but he doesn't know what he doesn't know. And it felt like love, or from what he understands other people, how they experience love, he thinks that's maybe what he experienced. And so he's putting that word to it, but he never felt that love for Lauren. Because, you know, if he had, he would have fought for Lauren. You know, he wouldn't have been able to not fight for her, right? He would have gone after the jabroni, or he went into denial, maybe for better or for worse, about the jabroni statements. He would have investigated. He would have fought. That's what you do when you love someone. You prefer them, and you will believe them more often because you love them. But in a scenario like that, where the love is so young, it might not be wise to do that because you barely know them. At the very least, you know, you take action. And in the meantime, you would still love her and be with her. They would have these together times in front of the camera, and then he would go home. That's not what you do typically anyway when you love someone, right? So I think that when he says that, it always kind of falls a little flat, and I think that's why.
There, for the first time in a long time, I don't really do that. And I meet this just truly amazing person that I fell in love with, and it was insane to me. And then so I kind of felt like hurt in that moment, not because of Lauren, but because of I was feeling like I put myself out there, and then it just all came crashing down. And I think that's why a lot of people stay single. It's just so much easier.
Interesting. So I don't know what point he's talking about crashing down, but I think what he's saying is, I put myself out there. I totally extended myself. I was engaged, and I was in love, and I was committing. And then everyone just came down on me, you know, my friends and my sister and all these other people, and everything was falling apart from his perspective. And then I tried to manage it, but then Lauren was really upset, and everything being crashing down was a big failure. And that's why people don't put themselves out there. I think that's what he's saying. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Tune in next time when I continue watching The Reunion. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.